absolute shocker. I could not believe, of all the coaches out there, I thought Pete Carroll, one of the more secure ones in the NFL.
I mean, 14 years with Pete Carroll, it's almost like crazy to just talk about that he's not going to be the head coach there anymore.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
May be the greatest catch I've ever seen.
An absolute bombshell. Adam Schefter reporting that the Seattle Seahawks are moving on from Pete Carroll, and I was just like jacked to talk to you about what this means for Seattle, because, man, it was an absolute shocker. I could not believe, of all the coaches out there, I thought Pete Carroll, again, just one of the more secure ones in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely text you. Like, I think we got to just scrap the plan because there's, there's been a crazy Wednesday where,
Crazy.
The Bears stuff is a whole different topic. It's gotten weird. Andy Behrens warned me on the Yahoo show that the Bears stuff has gotten pretty toxic in terms of like what people want to do with the organization. And I was like, oh, how can I don't understand how that could be toxic? And then, oh, buddy, it actually has been pretty toxic discourse if you pay attention to it. But that was this morning, and even that, like them announcing that they were making changes on the offensive staff, but keeping Eberflus, that was getting people fired up. And then we have the Pete Carroll thing, which is just like. I mean, 14 years with Pete Carroll at the Seattle Seahawks, and another one of my Yahoo colleagues, actually, Charles McDonald, posted that he almost felt kind of sad, like some sadness reading this, and I replied, I was like, yeah, I almost kind of feel the same way, man, because Pete Carroll is just so synonymous with, he intersects perfectly with, like, his time in Seattle, intersects perfectly with, like, right before I got kind of started doing, like, covering the NFL, like, you try to get into business, doing freelance stuff. So really, like, I don't want to say like my formative years, but like my formative years is like a quote professional, right? Like, them beating the Broncos, beating the brakes off the Broncos in that Super Bowl. That was really the year, again, right before I kind of started like getting into this stuff like professionally. So I don't know, it was like, wow, and you even forget, like, before the Legion of Boom, which was so iconic and all that stuff, like there was the Charlie Whitehurst and like Tavares Jackson, rest in peace, by the way, Tavares Jackson. But it's just been so, like, he's just been there so long. He's such an iconic figure in the NFL, and particularly with this franchise, that it's almost like crazy to just talk about that he's not going to be the head coach there anymore.
It really feels like an end of an era. Who do you think initiated that conversation? Because I swear to God, I don't think it was Pete. Pete, after that game last week, was his normal, exuberant self. You know what I mean? And there was absolutely no inkling that, yeah, I know he's old. I get that he's old, but he sure as hell sounded like he was just as energetic as he was 10 years ago.
I think his exact quote was something to the effect of, I expect to be back. I expect to be the head coach of this team again in 2024. I would imagine that it was like a mutual but leans the Seahawks decision type of thing. Like, where I think Pete Carroll would still like to be the coach of the Seattle Seahawks for maybe like 2 to 3 more years. I don't know if Pete, at his age, at this point in his career, wants to go and start over with another team. This strikes me very similar to the Bruce Arians thing a couple of years ago, right? Where now that was a little mixed up in the Tom Brady stuff, and like, did Brady only unretire if he said that, Bruce Arians has to get the hell out of here and go up in the front office or whatever.
Don't you feel like in Tampa Bay too with the Bruce Arians situation? The Tom Brady thing was obviously mixed in, but I thought a big part of it too was that Bruce actually had a succession plan kind of sort of in place. I don't feel like unless they come out tomorrow and say Shane Waldron's the head coach, which right now there's not really a lot of indication that that's going to be the case. We're hearing a lot of Dan Quinn rumors or whatever it might be, right? So unless they announce that, I would be shocked. I don't think that Pete had like a succession plan in place here in Seattle, which makes it even more shocking,
Yeah, you're right. There's no clear, like, Bruce Arians wanted Todd Bowles or Byron Leftwich to, like, follow. He'd been grooming these guys,
Yep.
right? Like he was very
100%.
big on the pipeline. He was very big on like increasing, representation, whether it was women or African American coaches. Like there was a lot of stuff there with him that he was doing that intentionally, being very intentional about that. I don't know that Pete has done that. This staff has been plucked pretty recently too, whether it's defensive coaches, Dave Canales, obviously from the quarterback room to the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. That is what makes me think that this job has to go to somebody that has ties to Pete Carroll, whether it is a Dan Quinn, whether it is a Dave Canales. Dan Quinn could have had a job 2 years ago. Dan Quinn certainly could have had a job last year, but he's been pushing it off. Maybe, I'm not saying like there's been a backdoor deal in place for a long time here, but like maybe there's been a backdoor deal in place for a long time.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
He's continued to push these conversations off, or these opportunities off to be a head coach. Now Seattle
Conspiracy theory. Let's go.
The place where it all started for Dan Quinn.
Yeah,
as the original DC for Pete Carroll there. So. I don't know.
And he knows, to your point too, he knows that if Pete Carroll takes this quote unquote advisory role, he'll have a voice in that front office. Like he'll have a friendly face in the administration.
Oh yeah. Cause even John Schneider, the GM, is still there. Like,
right.
And look, Pete has had, I would have said like 2 years ago, Pete Carroll might be one of the most powerful figures in the NFL period. Because like him and John Schneider work together. It's a very cohabitive relationship, very cooperative relationship. Is a very like, I would say a pretty even kind of split of power between those two guys. And I think it even leaned more Pete in a lot of ways, certainly from a front-facing perspective. He's just a well-known guy. He's out there. This is just his culture, all this stuff. I mean, this guy's had a hell of a run. And
unbelievable
run. He's turned this team over multiple times. He's successfully, I think, changed the team identity several times. And like when really everybody was ready to write off Pete Carroll, like, I mean, it's crazy the national sentiment on like Russell Wilson right now versus when the discussions about Pete Carroll versus Russell Wilson at the end of that Seattle time, like 99.9% of people were on Russell Wilson's side incorrectly during that whole thing.
Incorrectly, dude, totally.
Very incorrectly on Russell Wilson's side there. But that's still a credit. Like one last credit in Pete's cap that he was able to, kind of transition the team out of there. But I do think they got stuck this year. This team got stuck at like, we criticized Jacksonville for this, right? Where they didn't get any better from 2022 to 2023. I think actually you could argue that Jacksonville got way worse.
Oh, way worse. Yeah.
Seattle certainly did not get any better. They were in the exact same position that they were in last year, literally down to the fact that we are hoping and praying that the Packers blow it against a division rival to let us fall ass backwards into the playoffs, which is cute when it's like the year one with Geno Smith and all that. Then in year two, though, there's expectations. You've added players, and it just didn't come together. And I don't think this was a very I don't think it was a well-coached team this year. There was a lot of, like, offensively especially, there was a lot of mistakes. There was a lot of, like, receivers running routes in the same area. There was a lot of like kind of lack of details at the position offensively. Young players regressed and got worse from year one to year two. I mean, Tariq Woolen was like a foundational piece, it looked like.
Right.
And this was a guy that they were pulling on and off the field in year two. And he dealt with injuries as well, but still, even just like they were kind of not as enthusiastic about him. So I think that's probably what ultimately undid Pete Carroll, is that, like, especially the defensive side of the ball. Like, I think we do jump the shark sometimes talking about coaches. Like, I've heard from some Titans fans like, yeah, well, Mike Vrabel's defensive coach and the defense has stunk the last few years. It's like, okay, well, we don't need to judge a guy just on his side of the ball, right? Like, that's not how we do this here. But that is definitely a thing that has been problematic for Pete Carroll. Like, when the league moved on defensively from what he was doing, and like when he was the like his philosophy and his scheme was kind of the central guiding point, when all of these Shanahan coaches showed that they could beat that, he struggled to move on from that defensive philosophy. And then when he did try to move on from it into more of like a Fangio style to high type of stuff. Sean Desai comes on the staff, everything like that. It was a disaster, honestly, the last 2 years. That defense was really bad. So I think that's ultimately what undid Pete Carroll. Although, again, like I said, hell of a run, all-time run, and just one of my favorite coaches, I think, during my time, paying attention and covering the league and stuff like that. But, yeah, I think that's ultimately what undid him here.